Welcome to a podcast from the Phoenix Esoteric Society. We hope you enjoy today's topic.
Welcome to the Phoenix Esoteric Society. In today's podcast / article, I'm going to go over the introduction in The Opening of the Way, a practical guide to the wisdom teachings of ancient Egypt by Isha, Schwaller, Lubicz. If you haven't gotten a copy of this excellent book, then I have a link below. Please pick up this book and read it, and then you can participate in the study with me. You can add things that you've read, that you discovered, and you can also put some comments of what you think about things as well. So I want this to be a very interactive study, not just me lecturing from the things that I found out of the book, but also what you found as well, and what your thoughts are. I really want to get that information and capture it, so please feel free to participate, and you can do that by simply picking up a copy of this book. It's inexpensive, it's easy to read, and following along with me. So let's get to the introduction. According to her, people have a state of mind where they imagine that they progress unaided by anything, and this progression is simply regarding the process of human evolution and logical development. She says, research into human nature has therefore taken a biological, chemical, and largely mechanistic direction, with a purely analytical and Cartesian view of science, and has come up with no constructive answers to the question of how life ought to be lived. Now, isn't that interesting that this was written in the 1930s? And she is saying then, in the 1930s, that humanity has taken a mechanistic direction, purely analytical and Cartesian view of science. And compare that to today and what's going on in the world today, and I find that really, really interesting. This is also interesting because as we progress technically and scientifically as a species, we find more and more people unhappy with life and, in fact, depressed. The quality of our life doesn't seem to be getting better. It just seems to be filled with more entertainment and things in mass to make us unhealthy and kill us slowly, especially in the West. Poor people are still poor around the world, and many poor people are still starving around the world in this age of technology. She talks about a feverish search for anything which will indulge the senses and emotions until in the end an emotional stimulus is valued only for its violence, but whether the effect of its indulgence is good or harmful, nobody knows or cares. So a feverish search for anything that will indulge the senses and emotions until in the end an emotional stimulus is valued only for its violence, but whether the effect of its indulgence is good or harmful, nobody knows or nobody cares. Does that not describe our world today? I read that and I thought, wow, this was written so long ago, but it seems to be describing the world that we live in today. So even though this was written in the 1930s, it still rings true today. And in fact, it looks like she had kind of an angle on where we were going as a species. She says, the life of the senses, when indulged so far, becomes extremely exacting. It is simple enough to arouse one's physical appetites, but not so easy to control them. Nerves trained to excitement feel an unhealthy craving for it. And when the life of the brain and the senses has been accustomed to be fed continually from without by an unending flow of secondhand thoughts and images, of catchy tunes and twitching rhythms, it calls for these things because they render individual effort superfluous and shake to pieces any notion of real values. That is our modern world, dancing the infernal roundelay of haste, ever more deeply involved in the quest for variety and novelty. Again, this is describing our world today, and it was written in the 1930s. So definitely she has a handle on where we were going back then and actually where we've gotten to today. She goes on to say, a mind trained to these fanatic gymnastics will clearly show two characteristics. It will be insatiable, always preferring quantity to quality, and it will suffer for the need for speed. The worst effect of all these new impulses has been the nervous imbalance which cannot tolerate silence or inactivity, these two pillars of meditation, without which one can have no true intuition or spiritual experience. So look at our world today, how noisy it is, how much chaos and activity is within it. The age of information overload. And that's why our intuition and spiritual experience is in fact being degraded and dying. And I'll get to how in a moment. I can just imagine what Isha, Schwaller, Lubicz would think about our imbalanced world of information overload coming at everyone from every direction, all of its entertainment for some political or monetary motive. What is interesting is that according to this book, we have been this way for a long time and things are speeding up to some final conclusion. I think just about everyone out there feels this today in some way or another. If it is true that most people cannot tolerate silence or inactivity, which are the two pillars of meditation, this is why spiritual experience is becoming less and less, or it's becoming plastic and incorporated for profit from a self-proclaimed celebrity guru seeking fame and fortune, and we all see that happening today. How many are willing to give us the spiritual truth without asking for anything in return, including a big building to do it in, a fancy car to drive, a giant church or a huge temple, and lots of nice clothing? Who is willing to do it without asking for any of those things? The answer is very few people. And that tells us a lot. Lao Tzu said, silence is a source of great strength, which means today's chaos and noise is a great weakness. Pythagoras said, be silent or let thy words be worth more than silence. Silence is a beautiful and powerful thing, but it's becoming rare in our world of noise today. Ramana Maharishi said, sages say that the state in which the I thought does not rise, even in the least, alone is self, which is silence. The silent self alone is God. Self alone is the individual soul. Self alone is this ancient world. All other knowledge are only petty and trivial knowledge. The experience of silence alone is the real and perfect knowledge. Know that the many objective differences are not real, but are mere superimpositions on self, which is the form of true knowledge. And my personal favorite quote on silence is from Blaise Pascal, who says, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And I truly believe that. What the world needs is more silence, but that's probably not going to happen. So what we need to do is bring more silence into our lives. For some reason, silence seems to calm the mind and the world. Turn off the TV and the bad news. Turn off the computer and just calm the mind with silence. I have personally found that every spiritual and religious philosophy starts with the simple principle of silence. The second pillar she talks about is inactivity. This is why people in most spiritual traditions meditate. They realize the importance of doing nothing and becoming nothing by turning off the mind for a while. Instead of burning out our brain with constant entertainment and activity, it needs to rest. If we don't rest our mind and body, they will become unbalanced and diseased. How much of this do we see in the world today around us and actually in our lives. She says, a flash of intuition, it can only be perceived by one in a receptive state, that is, one capable of catching the moment of inspiration and allowing it to gestate in attentive silence. We are so busy filling our minds with entertainment today and stressing out about life that we miss its greatest gifts of intuition and the inspiration that comes from it in silence. Reading the rest of this introduction, I see an imbalance in the world today. We have come from a time when religion and spirituality were dominant in the world to a time when science and technology and a belief in nothing is becoming dominant. Neither is suited to rule, but a balance must be obtained between them. When you read the rest of this introduction, she gives some very convincing reasons why this is the case and what we are losing from such an imbalance. Silence is the head and spirituality is the heart, and both must have their own separate rule, because once one gives all of its power to the other, there's an imbalance. I'm trying to keep these studies at a good pace and shorter, and I hope you enjoyed today's study. I hope you will read Toward the One Truth before next week, because that's the section I'll be discussing. Please subscribe to my Phoenix Esoteric Society YouTube page, and I also have a Phoenix Esoteric Society Facebook group as well. Also check out my website, because there's a lot of information and great stuff on it. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to discussing Toward the One Truth with you next week.
This has been a podcast from the Phoenix Esoteric Society. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page and check out more information at our website at phoenixesotericsociety.com.